episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms.
If it's written work,
it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Larry.
Ari.
Charlie.
And I'm Josh.
And he's Josh.
And as much as Ari is feeling as silly as 10 years ago,
or about as silly as Charles now, we actually have another serious topic to go over.
2 days ago was the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
December 7th.
As Franklin D. Roosevelt said, is a date that would live in infamy.
And it has.
And today we're going to be talking about the poetry of World War II, which really was... World War II in itself was a great turning point for America, for American weaponry, and it was also a turning point on how people approached the topic of war. And I think that though World War I also explored this, people argue that both wars are one and the same.
And I also feel that World War II really stretched the term of treat others the way you want to be treated to its ridiculous lengths.
Even Rod Serling actually cited Hitler's actions that made up the Holocaust in the episode The Obsolete Man, where it said that any society that alienates anyone in any particular way is a society that's subject to destruction and will destroy itself.
I mean, talk about being bullied in the 8th grade.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
This is when they really started. People really started to understand what genocide was. Also, with everything having to do with the Holocaust, which we'll go over briefly.
Ready. Let's begin. The first question is. Do you feel that poetry written during or about World War II shows a transition from poetry written prior? Did World War I poetry beat this war's poetry to the mark? I touched up on it, but what would your argument be?
First of all, World War I and World War II, both world wars were just a mess, and we all know that from the textbooks we learned we had in school, which are, of course, I don't even want to bring up textbooks in school. I work in schools now. It's just, still, they. One side says we won, the other side says they won, and whatnot. But still,
winners write the story. The winners write the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, but you don't get the, most accurate. When's this textbook from? 1983. Okay, I'm a senior in high school now. But still, and it's 2000. You do the math. I'm not telling my age. But still, I think I honestly, this is from what I understand. I could be wrong. World War I was actually worse than World War II. Now I could be wrong.
because of the trenches.
And of course we had better weapons. And I know I'm deviating slightly, but It
also depends on the point of view that you're taking.
Yeah, it also depends who you're talking about.
The Americans were only in World War I for a year. World War II, they took part in nearly 4 years.
Because of Pearl Harbor. Or at least that's what started it anyway.
Yeah. That's what got us involved.
It did happen.
I was going to say is that...
Don't mess with us.
Josh asked an interesting question, and I have a very good answer for it. At least I think it's good. You guys can disagree. But... with World War I think since that was the first major war in quite a while, that people were had all these horrible things happening to them. I think the poetry written during World War I, like Wilfred Owen and some of the other ones, they were written as this is what war physically feels like. This is what go wandering around in trenches and mud and dirt and just all the grime of life and stuff. If I want to make a pun, I'd say life of grime, but it's true. Seriously. World War II is a little different because you've already had the experience of World War I. I think a lot of the World War II poetry has more to do with how people felt mentally about what was going on around them, and talking about how items were used, and instead of talking about the people and what they did. I think because at that point the world had matured, knowing about World War I. When World War II came along, they just went to the next step, which is talking about everyone and what they're doing, rather than like not what they're doing. I mean, that's World War One. Versus World War II, where they're talking more about their own feelings on situations and possibly other people's feelings on situations. It was more about feelings in World War II. Now, I don't know if you guys agree with me.
Well, no, I'm gonna agree with you on that, and I'm also gonna say this as well. These wars, most of us know that they were not that long. You know, they were only, I think they were only. Now, I'm not a history major, hence my degree is in English, not history.
I
But
believe World War II was like 8 or 9 years.
yeah, but I'm saying from World War One to World War II.
Depends on.
Sorry, it started in
where you wanna
33
begin.
actually, so
Yeah.
that means
It would be 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, but still, what I'm saying, what I'm trying to actually say is World War One, and then the space we had between those two wars wasn't very long. It was, that I don't know how.
It depends on who, because not every participant in World War II took part in World War One.
Exactly.
And in a way, vice versa.
Yeah.
Many of the World War One countries, the way that the countries were mapped out, it was redistributed as well.
But to Artie's point, maybe that's obviously true, but at the same time, even the participants who did not participate in World War One had the stories from World War One to at least give them a vague notion of what they were getting into before they got to there. Might have prepared them for the shock and the horrors that they were about to witness, to the point where they could see past the shock and horror and get into.
And I think every country has something different to say, because even take Italy for instance, they were an ally during World War One, and then when Mussolini came in, turned into an Axis power, and even he had his own people disagreeing with him to the point that when they offed him, they hung his body upside down, which Germany was consistently the antagonizing force to us, or to the Allied forces.
Yeah.
And of course, I understand some of the people who worked for Hitler. I'm not going to say any slang or lingo, but the people who worked for Hitler, some of them actually said, "You want to just kill this guy? He's a nut job." Of course, that wouldn't be what they actually said, but I think some of them actually.
Have you ever seen the movie Valkyrie?
Mm-hmm.
No, I have not.
Yes.
Is that?
I'll tell you later, but it's a movie about a guy who tried. It was about a movie who tried of a guy, a soldier in the reserve army who tried to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah, and I think there were multiple attempts.
There were at least 5.
I know. Okay, so yeah.
I think another difference between
Have a little wine. Here we go.
a difference between the two world wars is that between such, we saw a great escalation in the film industry.
Oh yeah, and the music industry. The music industry.
And radio started becoming big too.
They were just experimenting in World War One. In World War II, they were using film in order to create propaganda, and
they were using radio also.
And you had
radio. That was the time of the radio industry, so they used a lot of
it was an easier outlet to encourage people to participate, even if it just meant buying war bonds.
So I have an example of what I said before. A few episodes ago, right, I was on Veterans Day. I think we did Wilfred Owen's Dolce Decorum Est.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And what happened in that one is it's talking specifically about what it feels like to be in the war, in the environment that you're in. I have another poem here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read like 1 or 2 stanzas. It's by General W.S.T. Stacy, and it's called The Thunder of the Guns. So it has stanzas like, with the smoking breeches empty and the dust and cordite gone, there's a rumble in the distance. That's the thunder of the guns. There's another one that's, and as today becomes the future, our sons will tell their sons, that the men whose blood they carry knew the thunder of the guns. The difference here is it's talking about a sound and how the sound physically and emotionally and mentally affected people. It's not saying, oh, this is where I am, this is what's happening to me, and I don't want this to happen to you. It's saying, I'm describing a sound or a sense and how it affected everyone else mentally.
And you'll never forget it.
Yeah,
you know.
and
So
both of them, that's the core theme to both of them, is that it is impossible to forget because
it's doing something. It's doing pretty much the same thing, only it's being objective.
it's being slightly different. Like both of them have lines that are similar to what Charles just said about you can never ever forget it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just being written slightly differently because by World War II, people who wrote this poetry were already familiar with the concept of war. So they're using more creative ways of looking at it.
I think I should present the next question, which leads into what you're saying.
I like questions.
And that is, do you feel that there's a major difference between an observer and a participant's account of the war?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Of course, let's say.
I agree 110%.
I agree
Larry?
120%.
No, I agree too.
Already. Yeah, we're pretty much. I would say that
You agree?
Yeah.
I think that the consensus is the fact that the participant has light years more to offer than someone who is a mere observer.
It's like a job. You're not going to get a job without experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same thing here,
Mm-hmm.
where the poem's not going to be as good or as touching or as close to you if it's done by someone who's just looking at it from afar.
It's just the
That's
basic idea of take a walk, walk a mile in my shoes.
Exactly.
That's kind of like let's say I have a friend and he's really, really special for some reason. If he writes his experiences, it's going to be different than if I wrote about the experiences that I had with him.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, sometimes people aren't self-aware exactly, right? So his writing of his experiences might not be as accurate as yours, observing him from outside.
That's true. It does. It does depend on the person.
Point of view is key, but when you get multiple points of view, then you can take them. You can put them together and
It's like
come up
molding
with
it with
a.
it's like clay. You can mold it with clay.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can mold
It's
it
also
like
extremely difficult to do both at once. I know I was telling Josh earlier, I actually wrote a poem once that is a call and response poem where one of the guys, one of the persons is a soldier who's like, I don't feel that I should do this. There's no point to it. I don't like to be bossed around. I don't feel like fighting for the country is not as important as they make it. And stuff like that, and then you've got the general who's like, "You better do this, or when you're not looking, I'm going to, shoot you, and no one's gonna know." Because that's me as an observer, but someone who was who's not an observer, who is actually involved in that. If they had written it, it would have been probably more accepted, and
That's
it would probably
an interesting thing to take into consideration because a general, in most cases, has gone through
The ranks.
the same
Exactly.
hurdles as the private. And
So, like I'm saying, I don't really understand how a general would feel, so my view might not match what it actually is happening.
at the same time, as they go up in the ranks, they become a bit more detached to what's going on. But that you have both ends of the coin to take into perspective.
And they have, of course, they have more experience, like we were saying earlier. They have more experience, and they now, since they're a general, you have those 4 to 5 stars. You have even, or whatever, you have even more responsibility. And now it's being that it's 2016, and I've actually, a few years ago I watched what they call Hell Week at the boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I could not go. I would be in HR, so you just attacked 3 drill sergeants. How do you feel about yourself? I personally, and I'm friends with a few people that were or still are active drill sergeants, and they do that for a reason. And I think now they're trying to do away with it slightly. But personally, the Hell Week alone, 6 weeks. And of course, I'm an observer. I am not a participant, but I can see on their faces they sweat and they get screamed at. The mattress is done. The coin. They had to bounce a coin on the mattress, and if the coin didn't bounce, the entire barracks got destroyed, and they had to clean it up within 2 hours or so.
Yeah.
So that they're prepping you for that. That's why they're screaming at you.
Yeah.
They're some people say, oh, they're just exercising their lungs. In a way, they are, but personally, I could not go through that, and I would be in HR having dinner and cocktails with the general or whoever is in charge. But major kudos to you who have gone out and who are watching this. Of course,
when someone's yelling at you, you become much more alert.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah,
that's what you
it's like my
that's
mom
what
yells
you
at
need
me a
in the
lot.
military.
Yeah.
You need to be alert, otherwise you're not gonna have that drive to. You're not gonna.
Yeah, the general in my poem. I may as well just speak the last 2 lines because I know what they are. It's he's a stubborn one, so I'll take him in the fray. Crossfire killed him, not a one can find my bullet in the fray. Mm-hmm. It's basically saying, he's probably yelled at this person so many times, and if he's not listening, he's like,
I give up.
I'm not really, you're not really supposed to do that. But if you're someone who's that far out and have been in the war for like 5, 6, 7 years, or have been in more than one war, your mindset's not going to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what.
Being yelled at can also be unnerving. Which is
definitely.
something else that
I hate
want
being
you to
yelled
get
at.
used to.
I mean, come on now. We all have.
They want like the military would want you to be used to being unnerved because it's going to happen in the field.
But they do that for several reasons. A, it's to break the ego. Some people don't even have that ego. They just go in. Now, of course, and I keep reiterating that I have no experience, but I have seen. I'm an observer. I have seen what Hell Week is. I have family members that have gone through Hell Week, and one of my friends who was I consider him a close friend because he's a deacon at my church. And I was actually, I'm like, these drill sergeants are just nuts. They're nuts. And he said, Charlie, you think I'm nuts? I said, no, you're a deacon. You're kidding, right? And I knew, he's like, Charlie, and, so-and-so. And, you have, the drill sergeant is there to actually help you. He's there, or she, they're there to push you to your limits. And when you break, then,
Push you some more.
Yeah,
What's the next question?
Alrighty, the next question we're going to be talking about the poetry itself. Which World War II poems speak to you the most, and why? Do we want to start with you, Larry?
You go first.
Okay, I chose the war poet. Do you know it?
Are we talking the war? You mean the book?
No, the poem called The War Poet.
Who's the poet that wrote it?
I don't remember.
Okay. What's the poem
my
about?
notes. It's
I think it's
about
about war.
Yeah, it's about the life, I guess, or the experience of being a poet who is contracted.
Oh, yeah.
Do the switcheroo.
And I filled out when I got my card, I filled it out.
And
Thankfully, they called me.
and he's basically just talking about what he thought that his life would be, and now he's a warrior, and when it's all over, he's not. There'll be nothing of the artist left, basically. And he recognizes that and goes into it. He says that by the time this is over, I think the last line is that his face will be a burnt book, which kind of brings it all to World War II specifically, because of Hitler. That book burning Nazi. The first line, I don't know it exactly, but he's like, I went looking for peace, and my eyes were barred, like almost like.
Talk about imagery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then he goes,
it's not something you want to read on the beach.
That's about as bad as this song I was listening on the way here. Where I was like, we paint the picture perfect masterpiece that you paint on the inside of your eyelids.
Ooh.
wow.
So imagery for it. But
Yeah, it's pretty graphic. The censorship.
Yeah.
And
Just I think the idea that that he looks at peace as something that would be, like it's not within his allowance. You know, it's something that's outside of where he's able to go, and so he becomes Bard trying to look for it. And then the next line is, I went looking for words, and now I find an arrow in my hand. And it's just really good stuff like that, you know, that kind of just... I like that poem. That's all I'm going to say about it. I think it's a good one.
Ori?
Well, I mentioned The Thunder of the Guns by General W.S.T. Stacy a few minutes ago. I kind of went over that. I strongly suggest that you go online and check out that poem because
the fact
it's really good.
They mention him as a general really brings a lot of power to poem.
But just briefly, I'm going to go over 2 other poems I found on a link that Josh gave me. And one of them is just called Holocaust by Barbara Sonek. And it just basically talks about what happened before they were taken away and what happens now that they have been taken away. So it looks like it's another experience poem. And then the last one is called Frozen Jews, which is another Holocaust poem. And this one looks like it's more of from an observer. Not necessarily saying that he is an observer, it's more that it's in the perspective of an observer.
Nice.
May I look at that quickly? Because it's very familiar.
It starts down here, it goes on to the next page. I also wanted to just mention that I remember in high school, my junior year of high school, I took a literature of the Holocaust class, which was extremely interesting. There were some poems there too, and I remember there was one of them that kind of stuck out, and it wasn't not really a poem, but it's a very important statement, and I figured it's written work, it's game, so I'll say it. It's by a Christian pastor, I think it was Christian, named Martin Niemöller, and it was something like, at first they came for the gypsies, and then the Jews,
I remember that,
and then the gays, and then eventually it goes down. It's like, and then they came for me because there was no one else to stand up or say anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, that is probably one of my favorite poems / sayings / statements that I've used it in multiple research papers for religious classes, and I've brought it up with people a lot, and I think
that any written text or verbal text is valued by the people of this community because we love words.
Yeah. So about the Holocaust poems is just that with Martin Niemöller and what he was saying in this, I think it's just comparing it to now, poetry isn't really out there as much, which is a little bit worrisome because the way that some things in society, I'm not going to be specific, but some things in society are going right now, I think poetry would be very helpful for people to express what they're saying. But let's get back to World War II.
There's the argument, though, that people make that nobody could write true poetry since the Holocaust.
I don't know.
I disagree for general reasons. However,
was Langston Hughes before or after the Holocaust?
He was both, before and after. He was prominent.
Okay, I couldn't remember when.
But I really like Langston Hughes.
Is the argument that no one has or no one can?
Can.
Yeah.
Well, because
of how horrible things you can't make. But poetry doesn't have to be horrible.
And then
you get
people like Sylvia Plath who tried to milk out the horrors.
See, everyone thinks that poetry has to be negative. It doesn't.
No,
it's not.
No,
so you read the Emperor of Ice Cream?
That can be about anything.
What you say, your argument might only work for negative poetry, but positive poetry is actually much harder to write, and if you get it right, then it can become so many things.
I mean, it's almost like the indication of a statement like that is that we no longer have a soul, like as a society.
Mm-hmm. This is not my argument.
I understand.
Oh, it's not yours.
No, it isn't. Of course not. I'm a firm believer that anybody can say whatever they wish but keeping in mind.
The absolute last thing before we go to Charles is that I honestly think, I don't know if you guys out there agree with me. If you do agree with me, actually, could you put it in the comments? But I honestly think that positive poetry is harder to write than negative poetry. Now, this might just be my opinion.
Actually, you know what? I do agree.
The positive poetry is a lot harder to write.
I think
If it's fictional.
I mean,
I think people just see it a bit more absurdly.
I mean, I wrote a poem in my very first semester in college. Sorry.
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I was
You
gonna.
go.
The very first poem I ever wrote was about a cookie, and it was actually to the tune of "We Need a Little Christmas." I'm not going any.
C is for cookie.
No, it wasn't that.
That's a good poem, though.
We need a little. I'm not gonna. No. It was. I actually showed it to one of my professors. Charlie, stop doing drugs. I'm not on drugs, you twit.
Want cookies?
Yeah. And thankfully, I knew this professor.
All right, what do you got?
Anyway, this is from Alexander Watt, Truth on a Toilet Wall. And the only truth on a toilet wall I saw was in 8th grade, and I will find you, and I will play your drums someday. I'm not going to go in there. It was a joke. No, come on, man. Okay, now Alexander Watt, a little bit about him. 1967, he was very young. He was born in Warsaw, and the descendant of an old and distinguished Jewish family, and which counted among its members the great 16th.
Didn't he kill himself?
Yes, he did. 1967, he he killed himself. I guess you can say yes. Basically, he was a prisoner of war, and he was, I think, in the camps. Yes, he was in the camps, and his family was, later on in 1939, he fled east before the advancing German army. I cannot talk. They were separated by his wife and young son. When he was in the camps, I think in 1942, he converted from Judaism to Christianity, and in 1963 he left his. He has an extensive history. So, but he went in 1964. He was actually invited to the University of California in Berkeley, where he taped a series of conversations about his life and times with his countryman, the poet. That's a name I cannot even pronounce.
Czechoslovakia.
Okay, see, wow, oh boy, gotta get my eyes dilated again. But no, really, they were. I think he.
Czechoslovakia Wash is brilliant. We went over Poor Christian Looks in the Ghetto.
Oh yeah, and that's a great.
Last season.
It's a great work, but they were published posthumously as Mr. Century, so apparently he had a pen name.
My Century.
Oh, My Century. Jeez. Lighting in this place. I want good light next time.
There's light right there.
I know. No, but seriously, no, and
Glasses need to be cleared.
yeah, no, it's my eyes, I think. But in 1967, he died by his own hand, and this Truth on a Toilet Wall. This is very accessible, and it was a curse whoever invented the name corrective labor camps, and that's it. Just and it's describing what it earlier, and I think in another episode we talked about what it's like to be an observer or a participant, and I use participant very loosely. To be active or non-active, shall we say? He was.
Or to be witness.
Yeah. Working in these camps alone, just it'll take something out of you. And I've actually Pope John Paul II, and I watched the movie from 1984. He's actually now a saint, but still, he actually worked in the camps. I think in Germany because and he's one of my favorite.
John
popes.
Paul II, he was Polish.
Yeah, he was. And of course, they were one of the very first, to get attacked, and he went to mass every day, twice a day, sometimes even 3 times. But anyway, he had a saying, which is another reason why I'm so in love with this pope. Now, saying stupidity is a gift, but one mustn't misuse it. And of course, we all know I sometimes say stupid things. I do stupid things. Sometimes I lock my keys in the car. I won't talk about that.
Exactly. I exactly know what that means.
Yeah, and but still, and he did. He worked, and he actually tried to free people. He's like, hey, get out, really, and he had to study underground religion and whatnot, but still, we're not talking about St. John Paul II. But this man, he, you know, they all had the same, I think, they all had the same outcome. This is not cool. I'm not going to say anything else, but this is not good, obviously. This, you know, I'll just read a line here that stuck out to me. If I can find it. The ruler's hypocrisy can cause rebellion, but here any possible rebellion had been nipped in the bud once and for all. A lie is an infirmity, a disease of language. Basically, what I take from that, if you try to retaliate, you know, you had the guards, and of course they were armed. In some cases, I think they would have actually just shot you on the spot if you weren't working fast enough nor up to standards. If you try, now this is of course my own take on that line, if you try to retaliate, and if you stand up to the guard, and you go up behind them, and of course they were all in pairs, with a pickaxe and saying, I'm doing this for my own, you know, you don't do that. You know,
unless it's something like Escape from Sobibor, where you're actually trying to get groups of people out of there.
So, but what happened is this gentleman, he went in, you know, he had to use the bathroom, and he found that line on the stall, and I read it a couple times, and still, of course, you know, I have to reread things. We're all literature made, you know. A lot of us here are into literature. We all are.
Just the two of us.
Yeah,
in this panel.
we have our degrees in English, but still, I have to read things. Let's say Josh here reads it 10 times. I have to read it 15 times just to get it right. And, of course, just, you know, collective farmers dying of starvation were herded into films in which the tables buckled under the weight of food, under threat of death, that they had to believe that these banquets, you know, poverty, war, you know, disease, tyrannies, annexations. You know, you can find this online, of course, and we always say go to the library. But I found this online. I would look into this. I would read it, and of course, you know, it translates to, "I know not other land where a man can breathe so free," and that was the writing on the wall, which I can see over there. There's writing on the wall.
Okay.
Just kidding.
The
luck.
Initially, the works that caught my attention, the poems, were the ones that were from people that did not serve. I know that there's a defeat by Witter Bynner, who wrote a poem about how the white American soldiers were better acquainted and friendly with the German prisoners than they were with the black American soldiers who were fighting on their side. And it goes to show you the idea that they glorify all soldiers, but they still have their own problems in the interior.
Right.
Nabokov, who is, anything he writes is remarkable, that I've come across. He wrote an untitled poem about how if a small kid trips and falls, he either has the choice to cry or pick himself back up and move on.
I did both.
If you're in war and you get shot down and you die, there's no choice. The choice has been made for you. And that just resonates in my mind.
It's also sad that you got so many people, you know, in the war that if one of them goes down, it's like, oh, we just keep going.
You have to, pretty much, unfortunately. Yeah. But with regard to poems that are about Carl Shapiro wrote some brilliant poetry. His talks about he shows the two sides to the picture. It's how things were perceived by the general public and how it really was. And he takes, I think that it's necessary to bring both into perspective. And I think that how he writes it, it's immensely brilliant. Beach Red by Peter Bowman. I read that as a separate piece, and not from the source that I'm referring to. This is the Poets of World War II, which was put together by Harvey Shapiro. But Peter Bowman uses a biblical terms. He makes mention to something that was in the Bible, and then in parentheses, using second person so that you are the one feeling the experience, makes mention to what it really is like and how it's not so much. I'll read an example.
I like examples, especially if they're samples.
I'll read the
of
first
fudge.
line. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. In parentheses. Keep down, rest your body on your legs and on your arms, and for Jesus' sake, don't let your pimply ass protrude.
I'm sorry, I can help it.
Cradle your rifle in the bends of your 2 elbows, high enough so that no sand gets in the muzzle. Now place your hands out in front of your head, lift your belly and your chest slightly off the ground, and drag your carcass along by pulling with the wrists. Crawl, damn it. Not like a snake, but like a baby.
So this sounds more like not primitive, just World War I poetry, the same kind of imagery it possesses, rather than the thing I read earlier, but that's very interesting.
It does ring like Wilford Owen.
Very, very much like that.
And I do want to, I know that Dr. Toms, who taught the World War II film and literature class that I was introduced to this in, gave us a certain version of this, and I'm probably going to look for the paperback because this is only an excerpt. But the last one that I wanted to mention was Keratin, Oh Keratin by Lewis Simpson, which is a response to Walt Whitman's Oh Captain, My Captain, and it Whitman glorified the leaders of the Civil War, and Oh Captain, My Captain was a tribute to Abraham Lincoln. In Keratin, Oh Keratin, Simpson deems the authorities in the poem to be dormant and detached from the goings-on among the participants of the war, whether it be due to sickness or just due to simply being detached.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible, this particular collection. Everybody?
This was a long session.
Yes, it was. It's probably one of the longest ones you've ever done.
So,
But I mean, there was a lot to go over. So
Absolutely, this is. I think that there's a lot. World War II poetry is just so broad, and there's so much that can be said about it in so many different voices from so many different backgrounds. As
maybe at some point we'll do more World War I poetry, or maybe some other types of period poetry.
Or comma or semicolon. Just a bad joke.
I mean, if you guys have any ideas for poetry, put it in the comments.
certainly.
We'll see if we want to go over.
Also, like and subscribe.
Did you have any final thoughts, Larry?
Well, just back to your original point, Ari, because I've been thinking about it as Josh was talking there. Something triggered it. But the other thing to keep in mind, too, is that there was a lot of poetry being written during World War II that is kind of idealist and reminiscent of earlier times. It's not necessarily that people didn't wrote one way or wrote another way. The other thing is what was the appetite of the audience. What did we want to read about? And that could play a role too in the differences where all of the poems or similar poems could have been written in both wars, but in World War I we were more interested in celebrating or in critiquing or making famous some of the poems that they did then, and then in World War II the other. Not to say that that's
like in World War I, you only really got those kinds of poems, but in World War II you can get these or the old ones because they've already been established, or more. It's more of a variety of stuff.
There were so many perspectives in World War II.
maybe.
Granted, World War I had a lot of perspectives as well, but with World War II there was a lot going on.
I don't have too much final thoughts except that I really enjoyed this discussion. with you guys.
Certainly.
Same.
I've been waiting to do this episode since season 2, and I'm so glad that we were able to.
And if you're just real quickly, if you're interested in watching another episode where we did World War II type stuff, I know way back in season 1 we did Mouse by Art Spiegelman.
It was
Oh my
season
god! I'm out. Oh, just kidding. Did you get the joke?
Season 2, my bad. And there was also the thing in the ghetto, whatever.
A Poor Christian Looks
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Ghetto,
Yeah.
the season 4.
Christian.
So
yeah.
we've also done other World War II / Holocaust stuff. So you should go check it out.
Alrighty then. I'll leave a link down below to each of the works that was mentioned. As always, when we talk about a war and the military, we want to thank those that had fought in the military
And who are still continuing to fight.
continue
And of course, those who made
Absolutely.
the ultimate
Thank
sacrifice.
you. Thank you
have our
for
thanks.
serving our country.
deepest gratitude. For now, keep reading.
Keep reading.